been asked to read one of my poems, and I'm going to read a poem that is in this anthology, which is just about to come out. It's called Neurodiverse, and Flapjack Press are publishing it on the 28th of this month. I think Jenny has a link to it to put in the chat. So Kate is one of the editors, and Vicky also has a poem in it. And here is mine. Pretender. Natalia has a flat stomach and a cleavage. She runs a mile without breaking a sweat. Heads turn even when she's dressed in rags. People recognize Natalia and remember her name. When she speaks, they listen. All her messages get prompt replies. Natalia never waits to get served at the bar. Cars stop to let hers out. She gets voted into office, sought out on Saturday nights. Natalia's paintings hang in homes of people she's never met. Certificates hang in her own. She has more letters after her name than in it. Natalia is always first up and cheerful. Her book is on the school curriculum. Natalia can quote Keats. Thank you. So, need to get the right document up with the notes to my introduction. So I'm delighted to introduce the first poet tonight. Well, third poet, if you count Jenny and me. Vicky Fox is joining us from Sheffield. She works as a poetry teacher and a mentor and editor of established young and emerging poets. Her debut pamphlet, If All This Never Happened, won Munster Literature Centre's Fool for Poetry International Chapbook Competition 2021. Sorry, I'm going to nip out and just get a drink of water, but I'll still be listening in a moment. She's also won numerous prizes and awards, including the Aurora Poetry Prize in 2020 and the Prol Laureate Poetry Competition in 2019. And I first came across her because she was a recent Arvon Jerwood mentee for poetry, working with Hannah Lowe, along with a couple of friends of mine. So Vicki Morris, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you Jill. I like the way I've acquired Kate Fox's surname, which yeah, suits me a lot. Thank you so much for asking me to read. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you to Jenny as well. I'm really looking forward to Kate and Joanne's reading as well. So I've got myself a little script because I'm not very well. I've got a bit of a cold. I'm not on my best form, and I haven't read for a while. So hopefully you can bear with me. I might share my screen in a minute, but I'm just going to read a poem, yeah, without sharing the screen. So Jill asked me to be part of this, as she said, because I'm a late to diagnosis woman with ASD, and also a late diagnosis of ADHD. What that looks like for me is probably similar to a lot of late diagnosis women in particular, I'd say, but I'm sure we'll talk about that. But in terms of not knowing ourselves when we were younger, high anxiety as a child, not fitting in, feeling like the odd one out, being very aware of my sort of shortfallings and kind of yeah, my differences, and kind of aware that I was masking to some extent, but not really understanding what that meant. Yeah, and in terms of my neurodiverse journey, just the end of it is that about 3 years ago, I had a diagnosis of ASD and ADHD. And I just thought I'd start with something about ADHD, because I knew some stuff about ASD, but I think I really didn't understand what ADHD was. And I think a lot of people don't understand what it is. It's a very misleading title that really doesn't say what the actual reality of having something like ADHD is. So I wrote a poem based on the questions that get asked in adult assessments. So I'm going to read that, and it's called Adult Assessment. Are you in an environment compelled to do things? Do you function as an interruption occurring alongside other problems? Can you spot energy leaving your place of fidget? Click to continue. How often do you expect a deadline to remain seated? Do you tend to have a reluctant workplace in your avoidance? In meetings, are you a motor blurting out lengthy noise? Click to continue. When out with obligations, do the symptoms squirm in conversations? Are your challenging parts able to wait in line? How often do you lose or damage a hobby, but into external stimuli? Click to continue. Are you prone to meeting mistakes in restaurants? Do you pay close attention to listening to someone's unrelated thoughts? Were several of their sentences present prior to age 12? Click to continue. Are you an extended period of sidetrack? Do you require sustained thought? Are you driven by finding yourself as a completed answer? Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. 2 seconds. Okay, so I wanted to try and keep the poems kind of a bit related if I could, and maybe read some that I don't normally read out of kind of habit and nerves, I guess. I was just thinking about my childhood, and as we were talking about before people came in, about that even when you don't know if you're neurodiverse or in what ways you are, it's there in your poetry and it's there in your thinking. And for me, I definitely think I've explored it a lot without realizing I'm exploring it in my poetry. But I just wanted to read a poem about my childhood, which in many ways was quite dysfunctional, but I think added to that, having the lens of sort of thinking about my family. I think most of my family are neurodiverse, and not knowing that is something that is kind of affected the way I look at my childhood. But I just thought I'd read this poem. So it's called Where We Used to Live, and I wrote it after myself and my mum visited the first home I lived in as a child. Where we used to live. 2 Winston Close, the end of a council row, me dandling on tiptoes over the high garden wall. I could lean over it now. Once the littlest left alone eating soil out back. Lorna tightrope walking the fence. The ambulance, the time she slipped either side of the slats. The bloody seashell, her finger trapped in the hinges of the kitchen door. Just down from the stilted house where a woman strangled her daughter with a pair of tights, and the posh guy dad sold his car to, who did his girlfriend in with a brick. Mum in the dark for hours with just 1 candle and no coins for the meter. While we slept across the tiny landing in the coldest room with its lonely view out to sea. If you see people outside looking in, maybe taking pictures on their phones, they might be talking like this about the lives they once lived in your home. All the things that didn't make sense or go to plan. One day you too might pull up in a car outside. Remember who ate the soil, who sat by candlelight, who chased who round the garden with a mop or a carving knife. So the next poem is about my mum, and I wanted to read this because I'm sure a lot of us do this. I've always wanted to understand my mum, who's a very peculiar character. And when I started really thinking about neurodiversity and looking into it, my mum suddenly made a lot of sense. Although she's undiagnosed, I'm pretty certain my mum has ASD and ADHD. And there's a line in this poem that says, forever trying to balance in her own gravity. And I think, without knowing it, I think that's what I was talking about, particularly my mum's ADHD. So This is called Sending You to Meet Mum. I've told her to stay put, to just wait until you see her and say, Margaret. You'll know her by her beige anorak, by her rounded shoulders, hunched from years of stooping low over sinks of holy water, bleaching the everyday out of kitchen cloths made from old vests and knickers over bathtubs, swirling together the heavy fabric of 3 children and an absent father. You'll know Margaret by her restless, disjointed shuffle, forever trying to balance in her own gravity. And when you greet her, don't mind if her smile is shy, her teeth hidden. She doesn't like to show the gap her father left at just 13. Don't try to shake hands. She'll not want to. She'll probably give you a clumsy hug, turning her face away, or clutch your arm with hands so calloused as a child. I'd try and catch her still for long enough to touch the cracks and marvel at the toughness of human skin. Okay, so my next poem is a bit of a kind of comedy thing with this is I think I've got executive function envy. So executive function, most of the neurodiversities, if not all of them, can have issues around executive function or executive dysfunction. And simply put, that's the management system of the brain. So our ability to sequence, how our memory works, our processing, impulsivity, all sorts of things. And it's always been a massive issue for me. I'm also dyslexic, so I've got 3 overlapping kind of areas of problems in that area. I'm pretty good at masking them, but they cause me a lot of anxiety, and sometimes I can't mask them at all. But yeah, this is a poem. Just find it. It's page 28. Yeah, so this is a poem about a German train and how I've got envy of this German train because of how organized it is. And this is called German Train. I wish my mind was like this German train, with its neat fold-up storage, deep luggage racks, easy reach wall hooks, plenty of legroom, each seat with its own plug socket, little boxes attached for all the rubbish, and wide aisleways, no waiting to pass the food trolley, a separate dining carriage for pancakes and coffee, blinds you can pull down to mute the sun, a screen charting where you're going and all the places you've come from. I wish my mind was this German train, efficient, orderly, running on time, and all these thoughts traveling to who knows where, chattering, eating, sleeping, quietly crying, or lingering at the window, lost in the face, staring back. So just 2 more poems. My 40s was a bit of a revelation in many ways, and I had a lot of diagnoses. And the first one was when I was 40, and sadly it was breast cancer. But for me, I'm always a person that tries to look at the silver linings of things. And for me, what it allowed me to do is kind of take stock, because of my neurodiversities, and I've always been self-employed. I work a lot of jobs. I've always struggled to kind of have a work-life balance. And it was one of the reasons I never became a writer kind of properly earlier, because, combination of working class, imposter syndrome, undiagnosed, stuff and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a time for me where I actually really, connected with my writing again, and realized what I was capable of when I had the time to focus, and those executive function problems that I've mentioned weren't coming in and stuff. But I wanted to read this poem as well for Catherine, who I believe is here, because I know that she's going through a difficult time at the moment. So I'm going to read a poem called Before Diagnosis, and let me just find it. Here we go. Before Diagnosis, after Anne Sexton. The rooms of my adult life were mostly filled with too much furniture, no easy route to countless unopened doors, external hard drives stacked like tombstones on hardwood floors, the odd rug not big enough to sprawl out on, kindling in grates left unlit, folders of folders, lists of lists, a library of blank notepads, towers of unread books, dried up pens, everything typed in caps, and more screens than windows, their curtains routinely shut. But mercifully, the one TV buried underneath the desk. There were loads of desks, one with a pillow for a keyboard, and a bed with a keyboard for a pillow, and everywhere the glare of blue-white light. I would go on, but the detail's gone. I'd have to jog my memory more by opening up cupboards and doors for which the keys have disappeared down the backs of lonely sofas that were taken away in hospital green removal vans. Some have been plastered up. If I look carefully, I can see where they were in the daylight that breathes through each room like air into lungs. Now there are new doors, doors I've yet to open or walk through with a pen. The one that takes me out into my garden. That's my favourite. And I think I'm just going to read one more, which is the next poem. So yeah, I'm going to read a poem that I always think, oh, I'll never read this poem out because I think it see how it goes. But it's a poem really to say sorry in some ways to the younger me. I think a lot of people with neurodiversities who don't understand them, or maybe do understand them, give themselves a hard time. I think I was pretty mean to myself when I was younger and didn't realise what I was capable of and what I'd achieved in my life, sometimes against the odds. So I wrote this poem, and it kind of reflects a lot of the things that relate to kind of what I've been talking about, the executive function issues and a lot of the sensory issues and all of the things that come with being neurodiverse. And I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and I don't know where it's gone. Oh, I know where it is. Okay, yes, here we go. So it's called Traffic. And when they finally confirm what you'd come to suspect, that you spent your whole life concealing her as best you could, starting with the unwritten rules for little girls from rundown homes who can't spell out sounds, who can't sit still or tell the time or tie a lace or hone the flit of their moth-headed ways, the persistent puzzle to fit the slot, its morphing shape, the falling short, the energy shift to stay composed, to bite her lip, to quash the impulse, to stim the glitch, to hold the dam, to stop the spew of speech unraveling, the heart of it, the bandwidth blip, the getting lost, the compass flipped, a foreign map to read the code with lights too bright, sore eyes, the comfort zone that she can't take beyond the door into the world she doesn't suit, its buzzwire game, her bated breath, its constant bleeps, the bottleneck of incoming data, outgoing calls, the unruliness of decibels, the traffic jam inside her skull, the overwhelm, overdrive, overload, the are you getting tired keeping up with this? I digress. Where was I? Yes, when you finally understand how you spent your whole life masking her like she's only this. And then you look, really look at what she's given you and who she is. Let her stand up now. See her. Here she is. Here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I need a moment to recover from that last one. It hit home. Yeah, as I said earlier, I only recently realised I'm autistic, so I'm still coming to terms with that a lot. Right, I think something that I didn't mention, and I think Jenny probably didn't mention, is that this event is part of her series, What We Read Now. And one of the things that What We Read Now likes to do is ask the participants for a book or another piece that of art or communication that they would like to recommend. So Vicky, before you go, what would you like to recommend to us?
I'm reading at the moment The Triumph of Cancer, really enjoying that. Chris McCabe. Another book I love on the subject of cancer is the beautiful Love Makes a Mess of Dying by Greg Gilbert. Highly recommend this book, incredible book. And I'd like to plug some podcasts, because I love a good podcast, particularly when I'm overloaded and I can't always take in text. And I'd say Poetry Non-Stop is great. During April, they've got a prompt a day, I think, for poets, for NaPoWriMo. The Slowdown's fantastic. You can download that every day. You get one poem and a little kind of musing on the poem, which is really lovely. Used to be Tracy K. Smith. I'm trying to remember who's doing it now. Ada Limon. RG's Poetry Pickle Jar is fantastic. And I really like Planet Poetry as well. But there's loads, and I really highly recommend, if you don't listen to poetry podcasts, there's some great stuff out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vicky. So this is my delight now to introduce Joanne Limburg, who's joining us from Cambridge, where she is a teaching associate at the University's Institute of Continuing Education. She's a writer of fiction, non-fiction, memoir, as well as poetry for adults and children. And she won the Eric Gregory Award. Now, not every good poet has won an Eric Gregory Award, but all Gregory Award winners become excellent poets. It's always, to me, a sign of quality. Her first book of poetry, Feminismo, was shortlisted for the 2000 Forward Prize for Best First Collection, and her latest is The Autistic Alice, which is published by Blood Axe. Her most recent book is Letters to My Weird Sisters on Autism and Feminism, which was published last year, and I had the delight of introducing an online launch for that book and interviewing Joanne about it. So Joanne, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you to Jill and to Jenny and to Vicky. I'm very moved, and quite often it's quite hard to pay attention to the reader before you, because you've got that in the wings kind of jitteriness, but you really pulled me in. You really did. I'm going to read mostly poems from the Autistic Alice. And I'm going to start with the one that I think Jenny posted a link to, because I thought it would be good to read that. And a lot of this book is about autism, but a lot of the poems at the front are a sequence called The Oxygen Man, and they're about my brother, who very sadly took his own life in 2008. And this poem is called Sister. She will harrow this town. She will turn him up, whole or in pieces. Being a sister, she knows that brothers are born to trouble. Her part is to rescue him, lend him a heart to face his enemies, or failing that, confound them herself with withheld smiles, or with her sharp big sister's tongue. And if she finds them gone to ground, their damage done, she'll cut the losses for both of them and seek him out wherever he's lying, broken, and say, brother, there's no shame in one lost battle, or in 10. Put the file down. Don't drink. And if it is too late for that, she'll scruff the man and stick her fingers down his throat, or find an antidote, or make her own, or heave time back, or failing that, and even failing that, she'll take him home, and never mind how small the pieces. Most of what I'm going to read today are from the sequence that gives the book its title, The Autistic Alice. And I wanted to try and approach, I was diagnosed at 42, like everyone else here, I was a late diagnosed autistic woman. And I had all this past I had to make sense of, that I had to redeem or retrieve somehow. And I found it was easier to do it by putting myself in the third person. And because as a child and still as an adult, I really love Lewis Carroll's Alice books. And Lewis Carroll, of course, was himself quite probably neurodivergent. I made myself Alice and I wrote all these Alice poems. And some of them just have the name changed and the third person and they're a vignette of my life. And some of them have bits from the book. And this first poem that I'm going to read has the idea of an unbirthday. If you remember the Mad Hatter and the March Hare talk about having unbirthdays. I've got 363 unbirthdays every year. And this was one of those memories of mine that I couldn't integrate until I realized it was me being autistic. Alice's unbirthday. Alice is 3 and she knows it. She's sitting face to face with daffodils underneath the washing line, which is a roundabout for clothes. Her mother pegs some clothes up, gives them all a ride and pegs again. Alice feels like trying something. I'm 4, she says. No, you're not, her mother says. You're 3. She picks Alice up and pegs her to this rule. It isn't saying it that makes it true. I remember that very well. I thought I will try this little experiment and see if saying it makes it happen, but it didn't, so that taught me. And the next one is also me and my mother when I'm small. It's called Alice in Check. If you'll remember, through the Looking Glass is structured through a chess game. And this is another incident where Mum wanted me to wear a dress when I was 4 and I didn't want to wear the dress. Alice in Check. The bedroom is a battle scene. Alice at one end, her mother at the other. 2 queens on a chessboard. Alice is outnumbered, but she holds her own because she fields the knight whose name is No. And boldly he has snicker-snacked his bloody way straight through her mother's forces. See them on the floor, the choking collar dress, the orange flower yucky taste, the frilly dot bow monster. They want to make Alice into a girl for looking at, stop her tongue and force her skin to scream. They should be vanquished, and would be if Alice were allowed to win, but not today. Her mother does the worst thing she could ever do. Now look, you've made your mummy cry. The knight whose name is No shakes his wet head, and Alice, who must save them all from being drowned, gives up and lets herself be dressed for looking at. It's quite easy when you write about autism or any marginalized identity to stick on the things that are sort of stigmatized or traumatic, but actually I think you're sort of denying yourself the richness of whatever your identity is if you do that. And this is a poem about autistic joy, and it's called Alice's Antism. Ground is home to her. It's where her gaze can come to rest. Take stock of what has never changed, the rainbows in the gutter, the points and circles of the pouring rain, the pavement's long squared shoulder. And every summer the ants turn up, shiny black and perfectly themselves, bringing out the ant-shaped joy by which she knows she's Alice still. Even under the masking, I can't stop being excited about small things that other people don't notice. That never goes. This next poem uses characters from 2 different books. So we've got the caterpillar from Wonderland and Humpty Dumpty from Through the Looking Glass. And if you remember, a lot of the characters Alice encounters that represent adults are kind of arbitrary. They snap at her and they don't listen, and they're very unreasonable, which is pretty much how adults seem when you're any kind of child, but when you're an autistic child, double so. And you have to sort of fight to get your case across. And this is sort of echoed in a macro way in that autistic people have to fight to get our view of ourselves across against all these non-autistic voices that want to define us. And this is called the Alice case. The problem with Alice, the caterpillar says, is her rigidity of thought. Yes, says Humpty Dumpty, and her lack of empathy. Indeed, says the caterpillar, her mind blindness. Yes, says Humpty Dumpty, her inability to read faces. Indeed, says the caterpillar, or tone of voice. And then, says Humpty Dumpty, there's the flatness of her affect. Alongside, says the caterpillar, the strangeness of her prosody, as well as, says Humpty Dumpty, her adherence to routine. Not forgetting, says the caterpillar, her repetitive behaviours. Or her failure, says Humpty Dumpty, to understand a joke. Or her lack, says the caterpillar, of any feel for metaphor. Or her inability, says Humpty Dumpty, to hold a proper conversation. Excuse me, says Alice, may I say something? Of course, says the caterpillar, you may say something. Yes, says Humpty Dumpty, and we'll tell you why it's wrong. So this last one from the Alice section is called Alice and the Red Queen, and the Red Queen is the most arbitrary and unreasonable and authoritarian characters in either of the books, and she literally grabs Alice and makes her run. And this is called Alice and the Red Queen. Alice takes her first step late. Before she can take a second, the Red Queen grabs her hand. Stand up straight, she says, and stop that, whatever it is. Alice, are you listening? With that, the Red Queen starts yanking Alice in and out of rooms. Say hello, she shrieks. Say thank you. Say your name. Don't chew your hair like that. There are others keeping pace, but no one has to yank them. They can run and speak together. Smile, coos the Queen. You won't crack your jaw. Why are you so serious? Because it is a serious effort, this running to keep pace with all the other ones. Stop sulking, snaps the Queen. You need a bra, some heels, and sit with your legs together. Growing up makes running harder, but the Queen is merciless, dragging Alice far from home. Have some fun, she orders. Get a boyfriend, have a drink, dance for me, girl, dance. Dancing is worse than running. Every bit as fast, but now there are steps to remember. And the Queen's still shouting, you're drifting, Alice. Look how far ahead the others are. Alice glances at the Queen and sees she's now as tall as her. Screw you, she says, and walks. And I'm going to finish with two new poems. I was writing a lot of Alice poems at that time, but I've been writing a lot of Synagogue poems, being Jewish. And Jewishness has been more complicated than it usually is the last few years. And this first one is called Every Poem is a Synagogue, because I described a poem as a place where things can meet, and synagogue just means meeting place. I mean, you do pray in there, but you also meet in there, you have celebrations in there, and, you know, being Jews, you argue in there, and a poem is a place where ideas argue with each other and clash. And this first one's called The Synagogue Filled with Unremarkable Things. And there are lots of words here relating to things in Jewish life, but in the spirit of the poem and their unremarkability, I'm not going to explain any of them. There's a plastic tumbler next to a silver Kiddush cup, next to a Pyrex dish, next to a pair of Shabbos candlesticks, next to the letter A, next to the letter Aleph, next to an Andy Pandy book, next to a pop-up children's Haggadah, next to a maroon velvet talus bag with gold Hebrew letters, next to a bottle of Heinz ketchup, next to a bottle of Paul Wynn's kosher wine, next to a Hostmaster soda siphon, next to a white silk matzah cover with gold Hebrew letters, next to a bag of Smith's salt and vinegar crisps, next to a box of dried lokshen, next to a lollygobble chop bomb, next to a Snowcrest Parava ice cream block, next to a school Christmas carol sheet, next to a menorah, next to a grey Vauxhall Viva, next to the marble plaque in memory of the 6 million, next to your mother in a hat, next to your brother with a tiny couple on his head, next to your dad in his talus with the fringes you can plait when you are bored on unremarkable Saturday mornings. And this last one, my grandmother was born in a town in Ukraine called Kremenchuk. I mean, she was only 2 when we came over here. And the story you often live with as a family of Eastern European Jews has fled to Western Europe is don't think about there. There's nothing there. Everyone's dead, everything's dead. And you know that's not entirely true, but these stories are very powerful. And I hadn't realized till the recent crisis in Ukraine and the emergence of Volodymyr Zelensky, how big and how vibrant and how varied the Jewish community in Ukraine actually was. And I had these two simultaneous thoughts. One was, oh, I could have relatives there. Exactly the same time, oh my God, I could have relatives there. And a very well-known Ukrainian-American poet, Ilya Kaminsky, is also Jewish. And well, I don't know him very well. I had an urge to write a poem and send it to him. So I sent him this poem. The synagogue at the end of the world. The world, we're sorry to see, has a nasty habit of ending. Again and again, it rages and destroys itself, and comes to, and repents, and then forgets, then rages and destroys again. And everywhere and every time the world relapses, we find that one same synagogue, reduced not quite to rubble. Thank you.
Fabulous, Joanne. What a great set. Thank you. I'm so excited about that synagogue project. Can't wait to read more of those.
Thank you.
What book or other thing would you like to recommend to us?
I would like to recommend a book by Daniel Sluman. I think it might have been on either T.S. Eliot or the Forward shortlist.
T.S. Eliot, yeah. T.S.
Eliot, yeah. And it's called Single Window. And I was thinking about it last night when that programme about disability activism was on, and it was a love story between two disabled people. This is also a love story between two disabled people. And it's very erotic and very sexy and very moving and very true to life under lockdown and disabled life under lockdown. I think everyone should read it. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And while we're talking about Ukraine, there's a big event, a poemathon during the day and a gala in the evening at JW3 this coming Sunday. I can see Caroline Davis in the audience. Caroline, give me a nod if you have links that you can put up into the chat for those. Great, so look out for that. So it's to raise money for two small charities that are mainly transporting aid to or near Ukraine to help the refugees, and you can come into at JW3 to join us in person, or you can watch online if you can't do that, and you can sponsor us or make a donation to the various funds. So look out, Caroline will put the links up there. Fantastic. So the final poet tonight is Kate Fox, the stand-up poet, broadcaster and speaker. And I think it's the broadcast bit that means that instead of joining us from her home in Newcastle, I think you're at Media City in Salford. Is that right, Kate?
It is indeed. I am at the Holiday Inn, and it feels almost glamorous and yet weird. So yeah.
So you may well have heard Kate on the radio. She's done two series of her own comedy series called The Price of Happiness. She presented Pick of the Week. She was a regular poet on Saturday Live when they had such things, all on Radio 4. And she's still a regular on Radio 3's The Verb. Those are just some of her radio appearances. You might have seen her on the telly, most recently, I think, as captain of Loughborough University's Christmas University Challenge team in 2020. And they reached the semi-final. She's been poet in residence for all sorts of places and organisations, including the Great North Run and Glastonbury Festival. Her most recent poetry collection is Oscillations from Nine Arches Press, but her most recent publication, just last week, is a book inspired by her show about notable northern women. Where there's muck, there's bras. Kate, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jill. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I normally like really being in control of my Zoom environment in my little office at home with my very stable internet and my little microphone and my little room, and I'm not in control of it. And I'm now on my phone because my computer died a bit, so I'm going to read things off the screen and off the book. And actually, that really is a challenge to my executive function and my scattered brain, and also maybe a really positive part of having a very responsive brain is I was so impacted by Vicky and Joanne's poems that I've changed every single one of the poems I was going to do. So I'm saying that as if it's a positive. Of course, it's probably not a positive because it's just given me more to think about. But there we are. Hopefully it's more in the flow of things, and that feels important. So this is, I'll read mostly from the Oscillations tonight. This is called Masks. Here is a girl stood alone in the middle of a white aircraft hangar who needs somebody to take her hand. Here is a girl joyously kicking up brown leaves. People mostly see only one of these. Here is a girl wearing a badly fitting clown mask, plastic mouth rim digging into her top lip, and a girl in a lacy blue bodysuit which raises a red rash on her tummy. Here is a girl who can make a room full of strangers come to hug her like their own. Here is a girl who doesn't quite recognise herself, though there are always plenty of photos. Here is a girl who became a woman, who can see behind masks and round corners, and hear the gaps between words and things where light pours like falling water. Here is a woman who knows she can travel as fast as rewind to where the girl stands alone in a hangar filled with the sound of arrivals and departures. Here is a woman who knows that it will never be too late to stand alongside the girl in the hangar, take hold of her hand and squeeze. And I think quite a big part of my life journey at the moment is probably trying to, I was going to say, look after that inner child more, the one who was kind of didn't know what neurodiversity was, because no one did really in 1975 and onwards. But it's also about reconnecting with that inner child, and that kind of takes me to what Joanne was talking about with autistic joy. Someone asked me the other day, what are you like when you're unmasked? And I've thought of a better answer than the one that I gave, because there's kind of unmasked me, which is the very unfiltered, exuberant me that I can be on stage, where it's as if my brain is given full rein and permission to connect. And then there's an unmasked me that's quite overwhelmed and shut down and has nothing to give and has no energy to give out, and is just overwhelmed and is just a shut down, a computer on, I can't even think of the word because I'm slightly, when a computer powers down. So it's both things, not just one thing, is it? They're two different types of unmask. And I have got more out of connecting with other neurodivergent people in terms of seeing myself reflected back than any other thing I could imagine. And this poem, I suppose, comes out of that communal being with other neurodivergent people. It's called What Could Be Called Communication, and also takes inspiration from recent literature about trees and how interconnected they are. You might find them staying near the walls or clutching their earphones, rocking from foot to foot and looking just above their audience. They might be wincing at sirens, saying pardon a lot in crowds, clutching the rails on angled walkways, wondering at the calm faces of everybody else. Sometimes they rest a foot on a crossed ankle in such a way that others will click love in recognition when one of them writes a Facebook post about it. They might have coloured lenses or squint perpetually into the sun. They think everyone else can see the fluorescent lights humming. Their eyes dart or fix, so they might be called evasive or invasive. They're stroking a finger, twiddling with their hair, tearing up paper, something in a mesmerising rhythm. They do not always recognise each other. They were often to be found clustered around tea urns, outside where it's quiet, in the toilets at parties, in wombs and rooms where everybody shares the same nose because of those contagious genes. so they can perpetuate their tangents and straight lines, build forests of themselves, sending micellar releases of carbon and water to those who need them, survival tips, encouragement, warnings, impulses of sound and light. So yeah, I love the idea that we might be like trees. And you'll still find, of course, most representations of autistic people particularly, it's just one at a time. We're only allowed to be seen one at a time on the telly. And hopefully that is changing. Now, I've written down on my new notes, Vicky, peculiar mum. It basically made me want to do my undiagnosed neurodivergent mum poem as well. Basically, me and my mum didn't speak for 16 years once. And when I sort of asked her about it, she basically said she sort of didn't really think about it much. But she did keep an electric radio alarm clock that I once had that reminded her of me. So that was nice. Sorry, I know I probably take the wrong tone around this stuff. I bless my mum. Things my mother said the last time we met. When I was little, I had a tortoise called Timmy, but one day he wasn't there. My dad said he got sent to live in Africa, which is a long way from Cleckheaton. Your alarm clock was all I kept after you ran away. I've still got it. I'm not sure why I didn't get in touch. I was thinking about other things. You know, somebody tried to shoot your dad that day he got a puncture and had to go to the garage. Then Jim tried to give him a heart attack by putting something in his coffee. Maybe I gave you too much independence, but it makes you stronger, like that song, A Boy Named Sue. You've done all right anyway, since we last met. Was it 16 years ago, haven't you? The things you said about your dad and me going with those men, well, he's always seen himself as your dad, even if finding your birth certificate was a shock. But you need to move on. You always did have a very vivid imagination. It's been quite hard to fit my mum into categories of what mums can and should be. Yeah, I really loved my mum, actually, and I also quite liked her. But again, I need to find better ways to say that. So I'm going to do a dad poem that, as it happens, does fit very much into, I think, the stuff we're supposed to think of about dads. Even though we also have an unusual story. I tracked him down when I was 17, just 3 months before he died, and I was really glad to have met him. This is called Heirloom. I wasn't entitled to my father's name, but I asked to keep his hat. The circle of his skull must have been narrower than mine, but pulled tight down, it fits securely over my crown. Woven in grey wool in billowing mills where he bought and sold. Inside a yellowing label, Dunn & Co. Gentlemen's Outfitters, Duraform. My father imported 3/4 of the wedding dress material brought into Britain in 1975. His wife hosted dinner parties for the board. His secretary did his filing. His wife bore him a son. His secretary bore him a daughter. The children share a birthday exactly 11 years apart. Our dad must only have one fertile day a year, my older half-brother said the first time we met. His wife said it meant they could never forget. I knew we never had. I've waited 17 years for you, he said, the first time we met. Blood's thicker than custom, he added in the Smith's Arms. His hat, his embassy number 1, his pint, subtly defying the country club gin swiggers who had called him jumped up council school nothings. His the smoggy city of Titus salt and hot factory furnaces. Mine the sand-blasted city of David Hockney and hot sag alum. So many threads to draw together, only 60 days. Better out than in, said the intensive care nurse cheerfully, as thick yellow fluid spiralled round his breathing tube. Then it stopped spiralling. Now the further from his city I move, the more rooted there my vowels stay, and I sometimes wear his hat. Even after years have passed, it will always almost fit. And for me, there's something about the not fitting, the gap in that poem, a gap between self and a parent, between the self and a place to belong, a gap of class, a gap of regionality, that's very similar for me to the gap between a neurodivergent brain in a neurotypical world. And actually, I know you'll ask at the end, Jill, but I'm going to preempt a bit. We have two book recommendations connected to Heirloom. One is a book called Triple Helix by Lauren Burns, an Australian writer who was actually donor conceived. And it's a beautifully written book that explores that gap between self and place for the self in a world that does not quite acknowledge what or who you are if you're donor conceived. And there were so many connections for me between that and having a father that I didn't grow up knowing about. And people would say to her all the time, the thing that people would say to me when I said I'd searched for my father, they were like, but you've already got a dad. So A, he wasn't very nice, my stepdad, and B, it's more complicated than that. And I think, yeah, somehow there's a parallel search between that search for a sort of truth, which is not an absolute truth, of identity as a neurodivergent person, and that parental search. Anyway, we'll end with quite a short poem. And then I'm looking forward to getting to have a chat. Yes, I do have to leave at 7:45, but I'm happy to make a French exit and say goodbye in the chat. I don't want to cut everybody else short if you're still talking, but just to say how lovely it's been to be here. This is called Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Be mindful, they say. If your epithelial cells are under attack, just breathe. You can be whoever you want to be, they say, despite the death of industry. Expel the coal and metal dust from your lungs, just breathe. We are all equal, we are all free, they say, even with a knee on your neck, just breathe. The sky and the trees unclogged in this pause, opened to the sky to just breathe, breathe. Breathe. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Kate. Did you say you had a second recommendation as well?
Well spotted. I in my head I was like, oh, I did say I had two. Well, anyone noticed? Yeah, the other. So Heirloom was originally published in Smokestack's series of poetry collections, and last night we had a launch in Newcastle for Lightning, which is one poem from the 200 publications that Andy Croft of Smokestack has published. Lots of poets in translation, and lots of Northeast poets, lots of radical poets. I know Peter Reynard's in there, some of you may know, Michael Rosen, oh, loads, too many to number, but yeah, that's my other recommendation. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I just love, one of the things I love about poetry is how you can say so much about a person just by writing about their hat. That was really, really fantastic. So we now have the opportunity to have a bit of conversation, and a reminder, I think all of you should be, if you want to, able to share to save the chat. So if you want to keep any of the links or the comments that have been made, you can save the chat. If you don't know how, at the bottom where you put your message in on the right, there are 3 little dots, and if you click on that, the option to save the chat is there. So the first topic of conversation, oh yes, while I'm talking about the chat, if any of you have any questions for our poets, please do put them in the chat. In the meantime, we're going to kick off with something that Kate said to me. I think it's when I was talking to her about submitting for the neurodiverse anthology. And almost all of my poems have been written before I realised I was neurodivergent. And I was talking to her about that. And I said, you know, I haven't written anything about being autistic. And she said, you don't have to write about it. It's there in your poems, just as if you're autistic, it's in everything that you do. So perhaps Kate should start off on that. But there you go. Read, mark, learn and discuss. Please discuss.
Well, can I say, because I both agree and disagree with myself, which is not unusual. As in, I absolutely think, of course, it's there in all that we write, but a good reason to sometimes highlight it and make it clear and explicit is, well, actually, there are multiple good reasons out there. I think it's because often as autistic women, we're underrepresented sort of explicitly in poetry. And so it's about highlighting ourselves, though that comes with the danger of being pigeonholed. So I think there can be reasons for going, hang on, don't lose us, don't erase us, we are here. But at the same time, also there is no need, and it comes with complications to do so.
Joanne, Vicky, would you like to comment?
I think that what I've written since I knew I was autistic and knew myself better has been, I mean, better is maybe broader a word, but it's been more confident and I've had more of a sense of what I'm doing. And I tend to use writing anyway to explore the things that need unknotting in my life. And so autism is one of them. And I think because I was brought up by a Labour voting social worker, I have a great need to, I'm not able to just write poems. I wish I did feel I had permission to do that, but they have to do something. Otherwise, you know, my mum's cross with me, my internalized dead mum. Yeah.
Vicky?
Yeah, I've got a couple of poems that I didn't realise were sort of directly related to, I've got a poem in my pamphlet about stimming. I didn't even know what stimming was, and it's about a habit I have, which I'm doing now, which is basically scratching a little piece of material. I used to do it as a kid. I stopped doing it for years. And then when I learned about stimming, I realised that I'm going to do that. I'm not going to feel bad about doing that. I had this kind of shame about why have I got this really peculiar habit since I was a kid, and I think putting it in the poem before I knew about the autism was a way of kind of acknowledging it. So I think since I've known, I've been. I agree with Joanne. There has to be a reason. I can't just, if I try and write about autism for the sake of writing about it or whatever, it's not going to work. But I think the 3 poems that I have wrote directly about autism are the ones that I've read today, and I think if it comes up, it comes up, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But it does change the lens, obviously, of how you write and why you're writing, even if you're not meaning it to, because you're going to look at something differently and you're going to approach it differently.
I said it at the beginning that the lineup today, perhaps the 4 of us look more similar than other lineups I've done, but I hope that you've seen a wide range of voices and poetics, and also a wide range of both autism and other neurodiversities. There's a saying, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And do you think that being autistic is different? What am I trying to say? That I mean, there's a big difference between how men present or boys present and girls present. And I've had people say to me, oh, I can usually spot the autistic people. And somebody, when I introduced Joanne's launch last year, somebody I know who was there emailed me and said how much she'd enjoyed it. And she said, oh, I never knew she was autistic. You wouldn't be able to tell. I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
Oh gosh. Well, autism is well, I like to look at it intersectionally, and I think Kate and I have had these conversations vis-a-vis being southern and middle class versus northern and working class, and how that means we present differently, and it means that the resources we have available to mask are different. The stereotypes we can sort of piggyback on are different. And I think being Jewish again brings a whole load of different stuff with it. And well, nobody's just autistic. I mean, you are completely autistic, but you're whatever you are, and all the other things you are too. And you've got, you know, your life history, whatever that's done to you, and however that's made you develop, and everything else that's going on. So, you know, I mean, that there is a sort of very precise diction that I jokingly call the accent from Aspergershire. Which probably I have a bit sometimes, but apart from that, I really can't see what it would mean.
I've not heard you say that before. I love that. I see, it's so, I don't know, well, there's loads of things crowding my head. I'm thinking of so recently a male spoken word artist told me he has a diagnosis, late diagnosis, but that he's not coming out about it currently, and he wouldn't want to be, quote, some sort of diversity hire. And I remember thinking, oh, I wish I was some sort of diversity hire more often on the basis of my neurodiversity, because at the moment I'm generally not, and it's not that I'm wishing for more work in that sense. It's actually, I wish it was recognised as a albeit invisible, yet it is a significant valid diversity. So bring on the diversity hiring on that basis, whilst then, and particularly even more then, probably acknowledging the complexity of the intersections that means we need to acknowledge at the moment of that being a thing.
And it's great when there's more than one of us on the bill as well, because we're not interchangeable, and I think we expand on each other and resonate with each other. And it really, exactly, not just a token autistic. I want to pick up on something Jenny said as well, which, yes, there's a huge intersection between autism, between neurodiversity and issues with gender identity. I mean, there's genuinely a huge overlap with trans people and autistic people.
Yeah, I was reading something yesterday about how there's a higher proportion of autistic people who have gender identity, not sure what the word is, not issues, but they don't necessarily identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. It's quite interesting. Something else I saw a few weeks ago, the Welcome collection. It was on a website. I don't know if there's a physical collection as well, but it was a website of portraits of late diagnosed autistic women who had all achieved things, careers, families, etc. And we are the most misunderstood group, and the group most likely to hear the words, oh, you can't be autistic because you've achieved all these things. So that's something definitely.
Yeah, I had it said to me by a family member just on Sunday.
Can I mention the Kate Gatsby piece in The Guardian, which is from
Hannah Gadsby?
Yeah,
sorry, I'm doing it now, just swapping words around. But she was saying, I'm just going to quote her actually, the myths around ASD have wasted enough of my life, so I don't really want to waste any more time thinking about them, much less writing them down. But as the myths are so firmly embedded into popular misunderstanding, I don't have the luxury to skip over them. And I think the more that we talk, like people like Kate and people like Hannah, and Joanne, and we just talk about it and normalize it, and people start to realize it's you know, there's maybe certain things you can pick up on that might suggest somebody is autistic. It's difficult to you know, it's so grey area. And also in terms of the neurodiversity umbrella, when I was around 30, I found out I was dyslexic. I had no idea about anything else. And the funny thing is I made a documentary about dyslexic writers, which you can watch on YouTube. So I interviewed people like Benjamin Zephaniah and Sally Gardner, who writes under Sally Gardner. I think she's got a few names, novelist, and various people. And I interviewed a woman from Dyslexia Action, and I remember her saying that about 50% of people with one neurodiversity have another neurodiversity. And this was years ago I was hearing this, and it still didn't, I still made no connection over it. But I heard also recently, I thought about trying medication for ADHD, but I've decided against it again. But I've heard it said a few times that if you have medication for ADHD, your autism might become more prominent, or not more prominent, but appear more prominent to you as well. So I think that's another difficulty, is that goes hand in hand with the stereotypes of ASD, is that a lot of people with ASD will have overlaps. And you know, as well as us now realizing that ASD is a bigger thing than what you know, what we were talking about some years ago. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
and it's also worth mentioning that autistic people who aren't like us pale tend to be missed.
Yeah, women tend to be missed. People of darker skins, as you said,
Yes.
tend to be missed. Yeah, it's difficult. So thanks. Jenny's found the link for the welcome thing that I mentioned and put that in the chat, and I've put the link for the Hannah Gadsby article in The Guardian as well. There's also a big thing about language. I mean, as writers, we care about language, and there are things, Vicky, you referred to ASD, which stands for autism spectrum disorder. And I'm beginning to think, you know, I'm just coming to terms with all this language stuff. And I think, actually, I don't want to be referred as having a disorder. I'm going with ASC, autistic spectrum condition. And then there's neurodivergent, and do you say with autism or autistic? I was reading an article yesterday about the autism community and the autistic community, and the autistic community is people who are autistic, and the autism community is people who are connected with autism. They might have it, or they might be medical people who work with it, or parents of autistic children, and so on and so forth. How important is this language and how we use it?
I think Joanne's going to give a better, more measured answer than me, so I'm going to. But I do want to.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, but historically this is likely. But I want to. So I'm learning to be more tolerant around language at the moment, because I'm running a support group for late diagnosed adults, and some of the people coming into the support group who are connected to a diagnostic service. They are diagnosticians, but they're all autistic. Of course they are, because that's why they've been drawn into that work. So they use the language of disorder, and they'll say person with autism very carefully. And to me, historically, that has red flagged. Person who is around people who stigmatise autism a lot and medicalise it. And now I just think, oh, yes, that's the world they have arrived here from. And I have arrived more from the world of autism activism. So I say autism spectrum condition, and I'm an autistic person. And I'm trying to find ways to gently, because it is really important to me, I think, that we don't say disorder. And actually, but I'm trying to recognise that we are coming from quite different places, and that impacts the language we use. And if we get very hung up just on the language, it's going to alienate people. And I still don't quite know how to work with that. So Vicky, when you were saying ASD, it was grating on me in a quite painful way. But I'm assuming that possibly has come from, I suspect if you'd been around loads of autistic activists, you wouldn't be saying
but
yeah, I'm aware of the ASC thing. I think what I do is I worry quite a lot about what people understand. So I'll sometimes give a caveat to that. But it's like with the attention deficit. It's not a deficit. It's about dysregulation.
yeah,
So you know, I can't imagine them ever changing that title either, because it's been the only title they've ever had. But it's not a deficit of attention. Why on earth is it called that? So I agree. So I think what I try and do is just be vocal whenever I can about it. But as a person who is dyslexic, gets things wrong, gets things mixed up, and has quite a lot of anxiety around that, and also who's sometimes unfiltered, that's the problem for a lot of us. We walk away and think, what did I say wrong? Did I say the wrong thing? Did I think out loud before I, you know, like, did I say the wrong thing? And it gets us into trouble sometimes. So I'm really forgiving of other people because of that. I think when I ever see somebody make a mistake, and if people attack them or whatever, I get really upset about it, because I know that if they didn't mean to do it, how are we going to learn if we can't ask questions? And I think we're in a culture now that people are scared to ask questions, and so people don't speak, and I think a lot of really good conversations aren't happening.
yeah.
I'm just going to interject here because I know Kate has to go. So I'm hoping that we can carry on the conversation a little bit, and so that Kate can just drop out whenever she needs to go. Thank you so much to Joanne, to Vicky and to Kate, and of course to Jenny for inviting me to curate this event as part of the What We Read Now series. So if anybody else needs to go, you now have permission to do so. If anybody wants to stay, Jenny, I hope it's okay for us to stay on a little bit longer. Joanne, did you want to say something more coherent than Kate, I think is what she suggested?
Well, I think she was coherent enough. I think I just agree that, you know, I don't want to jump down people's throats when they're just learning. But I think what would make me cross is if I said autistic person and someone who wasn't autistic went, no, person with autism, then they would get politely corrected.
Yes, I mean, I find because I'm fairly new to this myself, but I'm learning. I've been on a very steep learning curve and learned about all sorts of things, including language. And of course, many of my friends, I haven't told that many people yet, but when I talk to people who know me well, who I trust to tell, I know that most of them are, without this being a pejorative word, are ignorant about autism, and so perhaps it's my job to help educate them and help broaden their horizons and help them understand what autism is and how it can affect people and manifest, and you know what it might have meant for me and my relationship with them and other people. So when they say something, I kind of gently correct them, and I think, you know, I'm not offended by them using the wrong language. I'm trying to educate them. And in fact, the way I disclosed to a couple who were very close friends, they were talking about somebody else, and I corrected them a couple of times about, isn't everybody a little bit on the spectrum? And there was another thing, and I said, oh no, we're not, you know. And there was something else as well, and one of them went, how do you know so much about it? And I said, how do you think? And they went, oh. And the woman, she said, oh my God, that makes sense. And the husband was quite surprised. And that was really interesting. And my best friend from school, she's known me since I was 11. And she takes no nonsense from me. And I thought, you know, if I tell her something she thinks is rubbish, she'll say so. And I was still just beginning to think that I might be autistic. And the only person I talked to about it was Kate. And she was talking about her stepsister's grandchildren being autistic, and I just ventured very tentatively, there's a school of thought, by which I meant me, there's a school of thought that thinks I might be, expecting her to go, oh, that's complete rubbish. And she went, oh yeah, I've thought so for ages. And that nearly made me cry. It was so affirming. But the reactions from other people are quite varied.
Yeah, what's interesting is, as though we say you can't tell if someone's autistic people often can tell if someone else is autistic. Not inevitably. I wouldn't say I've got it right 100% of the time. But we know there's that, there's a sense of being on that wavelength.
Yeah. So there are no questions that have come in on the chat, but if anybody wants to unmute and say anything, now is the time, or to put a comment in the chat.
I'm kind of interested, it sort of ties into what we've been talking about in terms of language and that sense within the autistic advocate and activist community. Sorry, my cat's just Zoom bombed us. That there's this real concern about language around high functioning autism and low functioning autism, around the sense that, you know, that some autisms come with quite significant learning difficulties and differences, and around this term Asperger's, you know, and obviously that's a terrible name to invoke now, and we all understand why, with the kind of you know, the Nazi background and the collusion with you know, with the National Socialist regime that Asperger had. But I know for myself, I find it, as a newly diagnosed autistic woman, diagnosed at 45, if I say to just the average person, oh yeah, you know, the descriptive term that best suits my profile is Asperger's, they get it immediately. Whereas if I say I'm autistic, I get a harder time from people who are like, what? Yeah, you know, they don't understand. So I just wonder what, you know, what Vicky and Joanne and you, Jill, kind of think about that, about how best to sort of describe where you might fit on that spectrum, and is it still okay to say Aspie, you know, because I struggle with that and I don't want to offend with it.
I think if that's your identity, you're you know, you should still call yourself that. I don't think using the word implies that you approve of everything Asperger did. And also, I think we need to see him in context. He was in a situation where you kind of collaborate or die. And I don't know how well many of us would have fared in that situation. I mean, there are a lot of things to criticize him about, and that is one of them. But I don't think it's black and white. I prefer autistic because I absolutely do not like a dividing line. I don't like high or low functioning. I don't like this sinister move to bring in profound autism. I don't like severe or mild. I don't like it because I think because there's no safe place to draw that line, and it blocks. And I would rather offer solidarity to people, even if supposedly they don't have the capacity to accept it, than be told, no, you can't talk to them, we speak for them, those are the other autistics. I find that incredibly sinister. So I say autistic, or yeah, I do sometimes just say neurodivergent.
Yeah, and one of the things I've read about language is that like I said earlier, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And articles I've read written by autistic people on this subject, they say individuals can say what they want. So if somebody wants to say Asperger's, that's fine, even though that's not given these days as a diagnosis. And if somebody prefers I'm a person with autism, then I'm an autistic person, that's okay. But the general advice to journalists or whoever, or people who don't want to offend, is most autistic people prefer autistic person. So if you use that, you're less likely to offend.
Yeah,
that sort of thing. And in fact, there's a question coming from Mary Mulholland. What about neurodivergent, or is that considered too vague a term? So neurodivergent is like an umbrella term, and within that you've got things like autistic, ADHD, dyspraxic, dyslexic, etc., etc. So it's an umbrella term. So I know when I was talking to Vicky, because she's got several different diagnoses, it's easier perhaps, sorry to speak to you for you, Vicky, for her to say neurodivergent than somebody else who perhaps only wants to mention autistic or whatever. And I did refer to this group as being autistic rather than neurodivergent, because that's what I wanted to focus the conversation on, and that's what all four of us have in common. There's also a question from Caroline, who asks what's the best thing people can do to support us, and she comments that we seem fine, that's the thing, you know, you look okay to me. And the thing is that you see us on days when we are fine, mostly. You know, if we're having a bad day, we'll stay in our darkened rooms and, you know, with earplugs in or whatever. So, and that's the same with people with all sorts of conditions, especially fatigue conditions. You only see them when they've got the energy and the ability to come out and about. And yes, we seem normal. And again, if you look at that welcome thing, that's all about people who've achieved stuff. So for me, I guess the best thing, because I was in a difficult situation recently, which I think was partly caused by my being autistic and communication problems. And somebody said to me, well, why didn't you just tell them you were autistic? I was like, well, because it wasn't a place where I could tell them and explain what it meant and try and get them to understand that that's at the root of it. So I guess the best thing that anybody can do is to do their own research, find out about it, read articles by autistic people from the autistic community, not the autism community. Nothing about us without us. Joanne, Vicky, do you have anything to add on that?
Oh, I think just keep, you know, reading autistic content by autistic people, and then you do have to budget for the emotional labour, as someone just said, because there's emotional labour and masking, but also if you say you're autistic, you've then got to deal with their response to that, which will often be, well, why are you? And if they accept that you are autistic, especially with professionals, you'll have, as I say, all 2 hours of their training will check in, and they will just talk to you very slowly, like even though you're the same person in front of them, they've suddenly realised you aren't quite the full shilling, and that's a bit annoying. Or they'll just be nervous, and the nervousness will make them inhibited or hostile, because people think they need training to talk to people like us.
Vicky, were you going to?
I think masking is a big thing. I saw something on Twitter ages ago that I thought was quite kind of a lot of people I knew would connect with it. It said something like, does high functioning mean we have our meltdowns in private? And they were joking, and it was, you know, like a joke where everybody was going, yeah, exactly. And the point is that if you're a good masker and you appear to be coping in your life and in your work situations, and people aren't seeing anything that they would suggest is problematic, then there is a kind of, well, what you're moaning about, you know, or maybe not moaning, but why do we need to know this information? And maybe people don't need to know the information, but I think, yeah, I just think this is obviously the problematic term of saying high functioning, because there is no such thing as high functioning.
No.
It's relative to what's going on in your life, and so many factors, you know, the opportunities we have in our life, the areas of privilege we have in our life, all sorts of things like that. And it's, you know, yeah, sorry, Joanne's going to say something on this.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say that the reason why you mask in the first place is, but if you can, is because when you don't, people are not positive towards you.
Yeah, I read something about, and I've tried to say this to people as well, that you're not severe and mild autistic, you are autistic or you're not autistic. And a lot of autistic people have other comorbidities, and that a better way to express it perhaps is autistic with, and what you vary then is the level of support that they need. And but also, as you've suggested, that level of support can vary not only day to day but within a day. So, you know, some of the time you might be able out and about, looking normal, doing your job, talking, whatever, and later that day you might be collapsed in a heap because you haven't got the speeds to speak to anybody else or do anything.
It's been lovely talking to you all, but I need to go now. And I
was about to bring